On the day I brought over handmade blankets for their unborn baby, my son slapped me across the face for disrespecting his wife by showing up uninvited. His hand left a mark, but not nearly as deep as the silence that followed. I stood there, blinking in the hallway of the house I helped them buy, the house I quietly paid mortgage on for 7 years. His pregnant wife, who used to call me Mom, looked away and said nothing. My son didn't even flinch. "You don't live here anymore," he said, as if I ever did. "You won't believe what I did next." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I promise this story only gets colder from here. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just picked up the fabric from the floor, the same soft flannel I'd used to swaddle him when he was a newborn, and walked out. I remember thinking how quiet the wind was that evening, how it didn't feel like a storm was coming. But one was, not outside, inside me. That slap had echoed through my bones, but what hurt more was what I saw in his eyes. Not anger, not regret, just annoyance, as if my presence was an inconvenience. I raised that boy alone. When his father died, he was 5. I worked night shifts at the hospital, came home with calluses and sleepless eyes, made sure he never felt the weight of it. I paid for private school when he got bullied in public. I sold my wedding ring to pay for his university deposit. I went without vacations, without heat in winter some years, just to keep food in our fridge and his dreams intact. And I never once asked for thanks, only respect. I remember when he brought her home for the first time, the wife. She was polite, nervous. I tried to like her. I welcomed her. I gave her my mother's pearls on their wedding day. But over time, the visits grew shorter. My phone calls went unanswered. I was told not to post baby photos online because they were curating an aesthetic. I was no longer Mom. I was Margaret. I didn't argue. I thought maybe if I gave them space, they'd come back. But disrespect doesn't shrink. It grows. It grows like mold behind a wall you never check. And when it finally bursts through, it stains everything. That slap, it wasn't just a moment of anger. It was confirmation. It was the closing chapter of a long, slow erasure. I'd been disappearing from their lives for years. They just finally said it with their hands. I sat in my car for a long time afterward, hands trembling, face hot with shame. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to be seen, to be acknowledged. But that version of me, the woman who waited for crumbs, she died that day. The version that was born next? She kept receipts. I started small, quiet. I checked the mortgage deed, still in my name. After all, I'd bought this house when he was still too broke to rent. I'd left it in his name jointly as a gesture of love. But legally, I was the majority holder. The nursery wallpaper he bragged about on Instagram? I paid for that. The backyard deck? My bonus money? The new water heater? My pension withdrawal. $182,500 in 7 years. I had the statements. And that was just the beginning. I went home and began to pull every thread. Slowly, carefully. No emotion. Just facts. Just math. Every credit card they used, I'd co-signed. Every surprise vacation he took her on, booked on my air miles. I pulled the logs. I printed emails. I backed up texts. I didn't do it to destroy. I did it to prepare. Because when a person shows you that you no longer matter, you better be ready to show them how much they depended on your silence. I didn't speak to them for weeks. They didn't notice. There was no apology, no follow-up, no message checking if I was all right. But I watched. I watched their baby registry grow online. I watched their friends post baby shower photos I wasn't invited to. I watched them tag my furniture in Instagram reels as if it were theirs. And I watched my name vanish from their mouths entirely. But you see, I hadn't vanished. I was waiting, with everything they had, in my hands. I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't even breathe their names into the wind. Instead, I did what any woman who's been underestimated her entire life does. I paid attention. And what I saw made me realize just how much of their perfect world was stitched together with threads I had woven, quietly, invisibly. His wife had no idea that every appliance humming in their kitchen had been installed with my savings. She thought her husband bought the washer-dryer combo as a surprise, the same surprise he pulled using my account, still linked to their shared online logins. I changed the passwords that week. Not a word from them. Then came the insurance letters. I still handled most of their health coverage through the legacy plan I'd maintained for emergencies. And when the premium notice hit my inbox, I paused, reread it, and thought long and hard about silence. I let the premium lapse, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. They were grown, married, expecting. If they could slap the hand that fed them, let them learn what it meant to be hungry for once. I watched the posts about her prenatal appointments dwindle. She'd write long captions about how difficult it is to find good care these days. I stared at the screen and thought, no, darling. What's difficult is realizing the safety net you burned was the one thing keeping you afloat. It's strange how motherhood teaches you to sacrifice in silence, and stranger still how that silence, once weaponized, can collapse a household. My son didn't reach out, didn't notice I'd vanished from the back end of his life. But he would. The first call came when their water got shut off. I recognized the number, ignored it. The second was a frantic voicemail. I played it once, then deleted it. It wasn't an apology, just a complaint about how this whole system's messed up. He didn't know I'd canceled the autopay, the one that deducted from my pension account. He also didn't know that I'd quietly rerouted the energy and utility bills to send notifications to my email for years, so I could track when payments were missed. I'd covered every gap before. Now, I let them slip. I let the pink notices arrive. I let the late fees pile. I let them feel the weight I'd been carrying. And I didn't do it out of bitterness. I did it because I needed them to understand the currency of respect. You don't get to humiliate someone and still benefit from their sacrifice. And then came the nursery. I knew she was close to giving birth. I knew she wanted everything perfect. Cream linens, soft gliders, night lights that dimmed on command. I had ordered the entire set months ago. It arrived in their garage, unopened, because she'd wanted to do an aesthetic unboxing for YouTube. I called the shipping company, had it rerouted. My address, my credit card, my right. I donated everything to a shelter for single mothers that week. Posted no photos, told no one. Just folded the receipt, tucked it into an envelope, and placed it inside the baby book I'd been building quietly since the day they told me she was pregnant. Inside that book were ultrasound copies I paid for, notes about names they were considering, even a sonogram frame I had custom made. All of it. Now a closed chapter. Because something inside me had shifted. I no longer wanted a front row seat in a play where I was only ever cast as the villain. I wanted distance, dignity, and that meant letting go, but not without finality. I called my lawyer the following Monday. His name was Daniel. He'd helped draft my will 3 years prior when I had my first health scare and realized the importance of paperwork. At the time, I'd left everything to my son. The house, the retirement, the bonds, even the old family jewelry locked away in a safety deposit box. We rewrote it that week. Every line, every clause, every inheritance. Erased, reassigned, legally bulletproof. I made sure of it. I transferred the house into a trust, one designed to fund scholarships for daughters of single mothers who had been abandoned. I placed the bonds into an account for my goddaughter, who still calls me Mama Mags and visits every month without fail. The jewelry? I mailed it to my niece with a note. These belong to strong women. Wear them like armor. And I didn't feel sadness, just relief. The kind of relief that doesn't shout, but exhales. The kind that finally sleeps without imagining being slapped again by the child you once held through night terrors. The final thing I did was quiet but surgical. I removed their access to the shared safety deposit box. I'd let them keep a copy of the key for emergencies. That trust, that naive hope that even when children grow cold, they won't steal. But they had. Not in dollars, but in dignity. So I revoked access, moved the location, and left one item inside the new box, the original deed to the house. A sticky note on top read, "Slaps echo. So do consequences." I never planned to tell them. I didn't need drama. But life has a way of revealing truth at the worst possible moment, or the most perfect, depending on how you look at it. 1 week before the baby's due date, I received a message from her mother. Not an apology, a demand. "We need your help. Things are hard. Be there for your grandchild." No name, no warmth, just entitlement dressed as urgency. I didn't respond. I made tea, sat by the window, and listened to the quiet hum of a house finally empty of obligation. And that's when I knew. They were about to feel my absence not as loss, but as consequence. The week before the baby was born, I stopped checking their pages. No more updates. No more forced smiles from the woman who never once said thank you. No more selfies of my son holding her belly like he grew it himself. I was done being a spectator to their fantasy, especially when I'd paid for the props. Instead, I started reading my old journals again. Pages from when he was small, innocent, grateful. The entries where he'd crawl into bed beside me after school, crying because someone had called him a name. And I'd hold him so tight I thought I could absorb the hurt through my arms. That little boy would have cried if he saw what the man he became did to his mother in front of company. But that little boy was gone, and I stopped mourning him the day the echo of that slap faded from my face. Funny thing about silence, once you get used to it, it becomes a fortress. They didn't know how much I knew, how closely I'd been tracking every misstep since I left. I had a friend who still worked in billing at the local clinic. She wasn't supposed to tell me anything, but she did. Quietly, with whispered words over coffee. The ultrasound coverage had defaulted. The nursery preparations halted. They'd tried applying for a short-term emergency grant. Denied. Their credit was too unstable, not enough savings, no reliable cosigner. Of course not. I'd been the cosigner. On everything. I had built their stability like scaffolding. And when I pulled the beams, the entire structure began to tilt. I didn't laugh. I didn't gloat. I just folded my hands and let gravity do what gravity does. They moved in with her parents temporarily, or so I heard through the grapevine. My cousin worked at the hardware store where her father bought extra insulation for the guest room. It was all very hush-hush, but small towns talk in glances, not words. And I knew. I knew they were unraveling quietly. The baby came early. Complications. I wasn't informed directly, but someone tagged me in a birth announcement. A blurry photo of a hospital bassinet, a pink beanie, and a caption that read, "Meet our little fighter." No name, no weight, no mention of the grandmother who had bought every prenatal vitamin. I stared at the image for less than 3 seconds. Then I scrolled. There was a part of me that expected a message, some acknowledgement, even a passive, "She's here, thought you should know." But silence. They didn't want me there. Not at the shower, not at the birth, not in the stories they'd tell that child about where she came from. So I made sure I wouldn't be in the legal record either. I called my lawyer again that night, had him draft a letter, polite, cold, final. It revoked any and all financial rights they assumed would pass through inheritance or family transfers. It outlined a clear path of disassociation. It included copies of the trust documents, the scholarship agreements, and the revised will. The envelope was thick. He mailed it on my behalf. Certified. Delivered 2 days later. Signed for by my son's wife. I waited for the explosion. It came 3 days after. The call was from a blocked number. I let it ring 5 times before answering. "How could you?" His voice cracked. Not anger, confusion. The voice of a man who'd never considered consequences. "You're cutting off your own granddaughter." I didn't say anything, just let the silence expand. "She needs things," he added, desperation bleeding in. "You're the only one who can help us right now." That's when I spoke. "You should have thought of that before you raised your hand." He went quiet. I didn't fill the space. I let it echo. Let him hear what he sounded like when the world stopped cushioning his cruelty. "You embarrassed me," he said finally, voice small. "You made me look weak in front of her family." I almost laughed. Almost. "You did that all by yourself." I hung up, blocked the number. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept the entire way through. No tossing, no dreams of confrontation. Just silence, like a sealed room with no draft. The next few weeks brought a flurry of movement, all without me. They created a baby registry I never saw, held a welcome party I wasn't invited to, posted photos captioned with words like "chosen family" and "the people who showed up." And in each pixel, I saw the effort to pretend I never existed. It didn't sting, not anymore. It just confirmed that I'd made the right decision. You don't slap someone and then ask for their hand. You don't erase someone and expect to be included in their will. And you certainly don't exclude a woman from the most sacred moment of her life, becoming a grandmother, and expect her to pay for it too. I began volunteering at the women's shelter again, the same one I'd donated the nursery items to. I helped repaint rooms, organized donation drives, even held a reading hour for toddlers once a week. And in that space, filled with women who'd been discarded by those they trusted most, I found something close to peace. One afternoon, I brought in a handmade quilt, something I'd been working on since before the baby was born. Soft fabric, delicate stitching. I gave it to a young woman who'd just escaped an abusive partner with her newborn. She cried, held my hand, said, "I've never had anything made just for me." I nodded. "You do now." And that night, when I looked at the empty crib still folded in my attic, the one I'd planned to assemble the day they cut me off, I didn't feel grief. I felt clarity. They didn't just lose a grandmother for their child. They lost the only woman who ever saw them clearly and loved them anyway. And that, more than any slap or silence, was the real consequence. The real change didn't happen with lawyers or letters. It happened inside me, quietly, like sediment settling after a storm. I stopped mourning the life I'd imagined, the one where my granddaughter would grow up calling me Nana, where my hands would help guide her first steps, where birthdays were shared and secrets whispered across generations. That dream was buried the moment he raised his hand. Not just the slap, but everything after. The silence, the omission, the rewriting of history in real time. And once I buried the dream, I found space in my mind for something else. A new kind of legacy. One built not on blood, but on boundary. I went to the bank that Monday, closed the joint savings account I'd opened years ago when my son said he was saving for a house. I remember how proud I was, seeing his name next to mine on those documents, thinking, he's learning, he's trying. What I didn't know then was that I'd be the only one making deposits, nearly $2,300 a month for almost 4 years. That's $110,400 he never touched until after I moved out. I didn't ask where the money went. I didn't need to. The Instagram post told the story, the trips, the gadgets, the down payment on a secondhand SUV, all funded by a mother he'd publicly erased. I transferred every remaining cent to a new account in my name, one built under a trust, a structure he couldn't legally touch without my death and signature, and then I drained the other pipelines. The automatic insurance payments I'd been quietly making for their car? Canceled. The annual health premium top-ups I made to keep them in the silver tier? Terminated. The postpaid phone plan with 4 linked lines, mine, his, hers, and the just-in-case tablet I'd gifted them for emergencies? I walked into the branch and had them disconnected. The young man at the counter looked surprised. "You're sure you want to remove all 3?" he asked. I nodded. They don't need to call me anymore. I didn't expect applause. I didn't expect understanding, but I did expect to feel relief. And I did. Not the explosive kind. Not a shout or a sob. Just that deep, steady exhale that says, no one is bleeding from me anymore. And still, through it all, I said nothing publicly. No Facebook posts, no family texts, no rebuttals to the stories they told. I let them paint me out of the picture, and then I pulled the frame right off the wall. The baby turned 1 month. There was a celebration. Photos surfaced, their living room decorated in cheap pastel streamers, a plastic cake topper, and 3 faces surrounding a high chair. The child, the mother, and someone I'd never seen before. A woman, probably from her side, holding the baby like a prized trophy. The caption read, "Thankful for the women who show up." I watched it for a full minute. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed everything I needed. They didn't just replace me. They wanted the world to see they had, and that meant one thing. Their image mattered more than their reality. So I decided to change the reality. Slowly, surgically. I sent out a series of quiet requests to update every document with my new address. Utilities, tax records, pension plans. I had my mail rerouted permanently to a private P.O. box in a neighboring town. When my name came up at the pharmacy as the emergency contact, I asked them to remove it. I wasn't going to be their fallback anymore. Not for prescriptions, not for late-night calls, not when things fell apart. I was done being Plan B. One afternoon, I went to the community garden, a place I hadn't visited in over a year. My old plot was overgrown, the rosemary bushes wild, the carrots never pulled. I brought gloves, clippers, patience. Spent 4 hours there. The air was soft. No one spoke to me. I didn't need them to. I needed the quiet, to hear the soil, to feel something grow again under my care. Something that didn't slap me. Something that didn't lie. It was there, crouched in the dirt, that I decided to take it one step further. The deed to the family home, the one my husband and I paid off in full before he passed, had my name solely. My son assumed, like many do, that homes are heirlooms, that mothers leave them behind without question. But I didn't owe him tradition. I owed myself peace. So I listed it. Quietly, privately. No for sale sign. Just a discreet consultation with a real estate agent who specialized in mature owners. Within 2 weeks, we had offers. The agent blinked twice when I told her my story. She said nothing at first, just nodded. But when she handed me the finalized paperwork, she said, "I hope this gives you the closure you need." I didn't respond. Closure wasn't the goal. Distance was. Finality. And perhaps a clean floor to sweep without memories spilling into. The corners. The closing date was set for the baby's 6-month mark. Fitting, I thought. A new beginning for me. The same way they'd pretended to begin theirs. The day after signing, I received a text from an unknown number. "Did you sell the house?" it asked. No greeting, no signature. But I knew the tone. I could hear his voice in the white space. I didn't reply. A minute later, "That was supposed to be mine one day." Another beat. Then, "You're punishing her for what I did." That one almost made me laugh. Not because it was wrong, but because it was so perfectly arrogant. As if the inheritance of a child he excluded me from was somehow still a given. I placed my phone down, walked to the window, watched the light change, and whispered something I hadn't said aloud until that moment. She was never mine to begin with. That truth hurt, more than I expected. Not because I didn't love her. I did, fiercely. But because she was born into a version of history where I was the villain. And no matter what I did, she would never know what I'd given up for her, before she even took her first breath. That was the real loss. Not the house, not the money, but the chance to matter, to be remembered, to be seen as more than a ghost behind a photo she'd never be shown. And still, I didn't cry. I went back to packing. Slowly, room by room. Not with grief, but with order. A rhythm. As if each box I sealed was another name scratched off a list of debts I no longer owed. There's a unique kind of silence that follows betrayal. Not the silence of mourning, or even the silence of rage. This one is colder, quieter, more strategic, like standing in a sealed room with no echo, only the ticking of decisions being made. I lived in that silence for weeks, packed my life into brown boxes, one memory at a time. Not with the sadness of leaving something behind, but with the clarity of choosing myself. My husband's records, our wedding photo, the small porcelain bowl he bought me at the flea market in 1978, those I wrapped in towels and placed in a separate stack. Everything else went into donation piles. I didn't want furniture they'd someday assume was theirs. I didn't want heirlooms to become inheritance. If he could slap me in front of his wife while I was holding a tray of food for her baby shower, then he could live without any reminder of the woman who once wiped his nose, paid his tuition, and clapped the loudest at every graduation. I rented a one-bedroom apartment in a retirement-friendly complex 40 miles away. Paid the full year up front, quietly, from the same account I'd been depositing my pension into for years. When the manager handed me the keys, he asked if anyone would be helping me move in. I smiled and said, "No one left to call." He didn't press. I appreciated that. I hired movers, scheduled them to arrive while my son would be at work. Not because I feared confrontation, but because I wanted to leave without a single breath shared. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me walk away in tears. There were none left, just strategy, precision. A month before the closing, I began assembling folders. Not the manila kind, the kind that live in cloud drives, password protected, backed up twice. In them were receipts, $218,000 in total financial support over the last 12 years. Mortgage top-ups, car insurance, rent deposits, utility coverage, grocery cards, emergency loans, every dime logged, categorized, and time-stamped. Alongside them, I filed screenshots of every text conversation that proved my role, of every banking transaction where his name appeared alongside mine, of every time he said thank you before replacing it with you owe me. I wasn't building a case for court. I was building a monument to reality, one that couldn't be twisted or rewritten. For me, for my sanity, for the small part of me that still needed to know it wasn't all in my head, that I hadn't imagined the gratitude before the greed. Meanwhile, word began to spread that I was leaving town. Cousins called. An old neighbor stopped me by the market. "Is it true?" they asked. I nodded, gave no details. Let the rumor mill work its magic. Let them wonder why the woman who never missed a family event suddenly had no forwarding address. It wasn't about punishing him. It was about disappearing without apology. One afternoon, I received a voicemail. From her. The wife. The one who watched him slap me and said nothing. Her voice was sweet, artificial, laced with condescension. "Hi. I know things have been tense, but we'd love for you to be in the baby's life once things settle. Maybe after the move, we can all reset?" I replayed it twice, not because I was considering it, but because I needed to hear just how delusional entitlement can sound when disguised as kindness. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the file, added it to the folder labeled facade, because that's all it was, a performance. A last-ditch effort to preserve an image for social media, to keep the illusion of the loving family alive. They weren't sorry. They were concerned about optics. I wasn't playing that game anymore. Days passed. My walls grew barer. My sleep became deeper. And still, not a single call from my son. Just silence, a coward's silence, the kind that only speaks when it needs something. I waited for the ask. It came 2 weeks before the sale finalized. An email. "Hey, not sure if you got the letter from the school district, but the baby won't qualify for local health benefits unless one of us is listed on a stable mortgage. Can we just keep the house in your name for a few more months? Promise we'll cover everything." No greeting, no apology, just math, just desperation dressed as request. I didn't respond. I printed it, added it to the archive. Then I called the agent. "Let's move up the closing date," I said. She agreed. Found a buyer who was ready in 7 days. I signed the final documents in my new apartment, seated at a fold-out table with a cup of green tea beside me. When the call came confirming the sale, I said thank you and hung up. No ceremony, no sentiment, just closure. Later that night, I opened the baby gift I'd bought months earlier, a soft yellow blanket with tiny embroidered stars. I held it for a moment, then folded it back into its box, walked it to the trash. Not because I hated her, but because I wasn't going to grieve someone I never got to meet. My love had nowhere to land, and so I let it go. The next morning, I transferred the remaining balance of my assets, $312,000, into a new trust. One that named a local scholarship program as the beneficiary. It would fund young women in difficult households, girls trying to escape the kind of homes that punish kindness. That money would change lives, just not the ones who betrayed me. And when I clicked submit, I didn't cry. I smiled, not a wide, gleeful smile, just the kind that comes from breathing air that's finally yours. I didn't need revenge. I needed freedom. And I'd bought every last piece of it, with receipts, with patience, with silence. And in 7 days, they'd find out just how loud silence can be. The thing about disappearing quietly is that no one realizes it's happening until it's already done. They call it ghosting now, vanishing without explanation. But in my world, it was just survival. I wasn't trying to haunt them. I was trying to be free. And freedom, I discovered, doesn't always come from walking away. Sometimes it comes from being absent in the places they expect you most, like birthdays, like baby showers, like hospital waiting rooms where apologies are mumbled under pressure and photos are posted before forgiveness is even attempted. I knew what they'd say once the baby arrived. They'd expect me to show up with gifts and soft words. They'd hope I'd forget the slap, the silence, the email. They'd count on the same woman who paid their bills to fall in line and pose for photos, the loyal grandma, the unshakable support system, the backdrop to their new family. But they didn't understand. That woman no longer existed. She was packed away in boxes. She was dissolved in bank transfers. She was buried beneath every insult they didn't think I heard. They didn't know it yet, but their baby would be born into a world where I didn't exist. Not in memories, not in documents, not in dollar signs. And the weight of that absence would be louder than any presence I could have offered. I timed everything, from the house sale to the trust fund transfer, from my name being scrubbed from shared accounts to the last will update, which now sat finalized in a fireproof box under my bed. Every legal document bore no trace of him. Not as a beneficiary, not as a dependent, not even as an emergency contact. He was erased, not out of malice, but out of self-defense, out of necessity, out of respect for the woman I used to be, the one who gave without measure and got humiliation in return. My calendar stayed full. I filled it with quiet joys. Morning walks, library visits, coffee with neighbors who didn't know my last name or my history. They only knew me as the woman who always had a book in her hand and never spoke about family, and I liked it that way. I wasn't running, I was reinventing. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. But silence has a way of shaking the people who are used to you doing all the emotional labor. It spooks them. And soon enough, the messages came. Not from him, he still hadn't grown the courage, but from others. His wife, again. Hi, we had the baby. It's a boy. We named him after your husband. Thought you'd want to know I didn't respond. I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it. Not because I wasn't moved, I was. Deeply. But emotion doesn't equal access. And naming the child after my late husband didn't bridge the canyon they'd carved. If anything, it cheapened it. They didn't honor him when he was alive. They didn't honor me while I grieved. And now they wanted legacy without responsibility. That's not how lineage works. A name is more than a label. It's a weight. And they weren't ready to carry it. A week later, my phone rang again. My sister-in-law. They're struggling, she said. He's trying to find a new place. You know the baby needs stability. Maybe you can... I stopped her. Politely. Calmly. You know what happened. You were there. You watched. You didn't speak. She stammered. Tried to backpedal. It was all so fast. Emotions were high. But hands were low, I said. And you stayed seated. That ended the call. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean. Like washing the last dish from a ruined dinner. Like folding clothes that no longer smelled like home. Every word they offered came coded in implication, as if forgiveness was the natural order, as if mothers were required to forget. But I wasn't forgetting. I was remembering, in high definition. Every silence, every glance, every moment where I was expected to bend, to bow, to break. And I wasn't breaking anymore. The baby's arrival was plastered across social media. I didn't look. But friends sent screenshots anyway. Look what they posted, one message said. A photo, the three of them in a hospital bed, smiles wide. Caption, 3 generations of strength. Wish Nana was here to see this. As if I were dead. As if I hadn't stood in that kitchen just weeks ago, holding a tray of cupcakes and wearing the same necklace my husband gave me the night our son was born. They had rewritten the story, made me a ghost while my bones were still warm. And yet, I didn't react. I didn't post. I didn't message. I didn't explain. I let the image stand. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is letting them show the world a lie and watching them live in it. I knew the money would run out soon. I knew the gifts would stop. The support system they thought was unshakable had quietly dismantled itself. And while they posed for likes, they didn't realize they were standing on borrowed time. The house was sold. The accounts were empty. The last favor had already been granted, and it was my silence. One night, I sat on my new porch, tea in hand, blanket across my lap. The wind carried the faint scent of honeysuckle. It reminded me of summers when my son was little, chasing fireflies, begging for one more bedtime story. I smiled at the memory, but I didn't cry, because nostalgia is not permission, and love once weaponized, becomes something else entirely. It becomes armor. It becomes resolve. It becomes a wall so high they can no longer find the door. And behind that wall, I rested, waiting, because I knew the day was coming. The day the phone would ring not with celebration, but with need. Not with updates, but with consequences. And when that day came, I wouldn't answer. There's a kind of stillness that settles before a storm, and I could feel it in the quiet hours. That pressure in the air, heavy but invisible, like the pause before a scream. I didn't check my phone anymore. I didn't need to. The timeline of unraveling had already been set in motion. I had left no loose threads. Every withdrawal, every change of signature, every closed account had been logged and notarized. I had even updated my healthcare power of attorney to a cousin in another state, someone who didn't know my son's name and had no interest in learning it. The more I erased him, the lighter I felt. And yet, I knew what was coming. Not because I wanted it, but because people like him, people who build their castles on someone else's back, always crumble when the scaffolding is removed. And I had been his scaffolding, his monthly rescuer, his quiet lender, his babysitter in disguise, his financial safety net, his background character. Without me, the cracks were inevitable. I heard it first from the grocery clerk, a soft-spoken girl with too many piercings and kind eyes. "Your daughter-in-law came in with the baby last week," she said. She looked tired. Asked if y'all still lived on Sycamore. I smiled. Not for a while. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Women carry things men never even notice. That night, I pulled out the final file, the one labeled post-birth provisions. It was something I had prepared months ago. A document folder containing every record they once relied on. House deeds, insurance contacts, mutual fund reports, school trust drafts. All of it void. And on the top page, a single handwritten note. "You ended it." I just responded. I sealed the file and tucked it into a padded envelope. No return address, just their names. It was never mailed. It sat on the hallway table for 3 days. A monument, a warning, a goodbye. Then I threw it into the fire. Some things don't deserve delivery. Let them wonder. Let them feel the absence in every corner of their crumbling world. The whispers grew. My neighbor, bless her heart, tried to act casual when she said it. "Heard your boy's back living with his in-laws. Tough time. Baby's colicky. Bills piling up." I nodded. Life has a rhythm. "You thinking of reaching out?" I turned to her, eyes soft. He reached out with his hand. That was the last word he'll ever get. She didn't bring it up again. But others did. More texts. A voicemail I didn't open. His voice, shaking, cracked with pressure. I deleted it before it finished. Because here's the truth they never tell you. Healing is not linear, but power is. And when a woman finally steps into hers, you can hear the fear in every attempt to pull her back. He wanted forgiveness without apology. He wanted legacy without labor. He wanted to skip the pages and rewrite the chapter. But I wasn't a story to edit. I was the author. And I had changed the ending. I caught wind of the final straw from a friend in HR, someone who used to work at the same company where I pulled strings to get him hired 6 years ago. "He's being let go," she said. 3 warnings, 1 altercation. Seems like things are falling apart. I didn't smile, but I did breathe deeper. I remembered the day I walked into that office with a glowing letter of recommendation, my pearl earrings on and my voice full of pride. I remembered the way I'd talked him up, the way I'd shaken hands. And now he had used that platform to spiral, to waste, to crumble. That wasn't my failure. That was his reflection. The last push came in the form of a doorstep visit. I was folding laundry when the knock came. 3 slow taps, like a student asking to come inside. I opened it with no expression. He stood there, pale, thinner than I remembered, eyes full of something I couldn't name. Desperation, maybe, or shame. His hands shook. Behind him, their old car idled, rust licking its edges, the baby wailing from inside. I don't know where else to go," he whispered. I didn't move. "You don't have to let me in," he said. "I just need to know if there's anything left. Anything at all." I stepped outside, closed the door behind me. "There is something left," I said. He looked up, hopeful. "There's peace, and I'm not trading it for pity." His face cracked, not with anger, but with grief. The realization that this wasn't a bluff, that the woman who raised him, who clothed him, who bought the diapers and stitched the costumes and paid the college rent, she wasn't bluffing. She had vanished, and in her place stood someone he couldn't manipulate with nostalgia or blood. He stepped back. "I'm sorry," he said. I nodded. "You should be, for her sake." I pointed toward the baby. "Because one day, she'll ask, and you'll have to explain why she never met her grandmother, why there are no photos, no gifts, no mentions in the will, and you'll have to say the words out loud, 'Because I hit her, in front of you.'" He sobbed. But I didn't reach out. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I turned, opened my door, and stepped inside. Left him to carry the moment. Left him to explain it to the child whose name bore my husband's blood but none of our grace. I sat down at the table, poured a fresh cup of tea, and stared at the silence, thick and absolute. The knock never came again. But I knew the next one would, and this time, it wouldn't be from him. It would be from the world he built without a foundation. A world of rent due, jobs lost, favors dried up. And when it collapsed, he'd look for the woman he once struck and find only shadows. Because the final act wasn't rage, it wasn't revenge, it was absence. And it was louder than any scream I could have given. He wanted to throw a party, a baby shower to be exact. Not in his house, of course. That house wasn't really his, not legally, not financially, and soon, not physically either. He asked a mutual family friend to host it, someone kind and neutral enough not to choose sides, and he told her he hoped maybe I'd come, maybe this would patch things up. But what he didn't know was that by the time he was ordering pastel balloons and gluten-free cupcakes, I'd already met with my attorney twice, updated my will, removed his name from every asset, every deed, every emergency contact form, and made sure that the college trust I'd quietly built for the future grandchild was dissolved and redirected into a scholarship fund for single mothers. Mothers who raised their children with dignity, not entitlement. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. That was the beauty of it. I didn't need to. When the baby shower arrived, I didn't attend, but I sent a gift. A large, wrapped envelope delivered by courier, marked only with my handwriting. They opened it during the final toast, expecting a check or heirloom. Instead, inside were 3 documents: the notarized removal of my son from the will, the cancellation of his co-ownership on the house title effective immediately, and a signed letter that simply said, "Legacy isn't inherited, it's earned." Silence fell like a guillotine. Phones were put down. The room stopped smiling. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard later that she, the daughter-in-law, turned to him slowly, hand on her belly, and asked him in a trembling voice, "What did you do to her?" He had no answer, because there was no excuse grand enough to explain how a man slaps the woman who raised him in front of the new family she helped build. There was no way to justify discarding a mother like old furniture when she was the one who laid the foundation beneath every piece of their lives. And now, with one letter, that foundation was gone. The trust, the safety net, the inheritance, all of it vanished. And I didn't say a word. That was the real revenge. Not the paperwork, not the erased dollars, but the fact that I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I let him watch everything he assumed was his disappear in front of everyone he was trying to impress. That's how you end a story like this. Not with fire, but with frost. Cold, quiet, final. I didn't take away his future. I gave him exactly what he asked for, a life without me in it. And now, that child will be born into the shadow of that choice, not knowing my name, not wearing the clothes I stitched, not holding the blanket I wove. And when they ask someday why I'm not around, there will be a pause, a heavy, bitter pause, and the answer will never quite come. When the door clicked shut behind me that night, there was no applause, no tears, no one waiting to congratulate me. Just silence, thick, deliberate, and unfamiliar. The kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from something heavier, like release. I placed my keys on the entry table, next to the faded photograph of my husband holding our son in his arms. The frame was dusty. I hadn't touched it in months. I used to clean that photo every week, almost like a ritual, like a prayer. Now I couldn't bring myself to wipe it clean. I wasn't trying to forget. I just didn't want to pretend anymore. I walked through the house slowly, touching the back of each chair, running my fingertips across the wooden table we bought after our 5th anniversary. Every room had stories. Every wall held secrets. And still, it all felt hollow now, like a museum of motherhood no one cared to visit. I made tea, not out of habit, but out of defiance. My hand trembled slightly as I poured the water, not because I was scared or angry, but because I was free, and I didn't quite know what to do with that. I sat in the living room without turning on the lights. Just me, the shadows, and the hum of the old refrigerator in the background. The couch across from me was where my son used to sleep when he got sick. I remembered changing his fever-soaked sheets and sitting beside him all night just to keep him from crying. Now that same boy had turned into a man who looked at me like I was disposable, a burden, a leftover. But not anymore. Not after tonight. Not after I handed him his future in an envelope and quietly walked away. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. Word spreads quickly in families, even when no one talks directly. By the next morning, 3 cousins had already texted me. 2 aunts called. 1 sent flowers. None of them asked if it was true. They all knew it was. Because I had spent my entire life giving. And no one who gives like that snaps overnight. This wasn't a tantrum. It was a correction. A recalibration of my worth. I thought I would feel empty. I didn't. I felt measured. Like the math had finally been done. Like the ledger was finally balanced. I opened a drawer in the side table and pulled out an old journal, the kind with a cloth cover and frayed ribbon marker. I hadn't written in it in over a decade, but tonight felt like a night that needed to be remembered. Not for the world, just for me. I wrote 1 sentence. He slapped me in front of the person I raised him to protect, and still thought I would protect him. I put the pen down, closed the journal, pushed it back into the drawer. That was enough. I didn't need to scream into the void. I didn't need to explain it to friends or therapists or the internet. I had lived it. That was enough. The lawyer would finish filing the deed changes next week. The scholarship fund had already been approved. The bank confirmed the final transfer out of the joint account that morning. Every door was closing, not with a bang, but with a soft click that no one could stop. My phone buzzed once. It was him. No message. Just his name. I didn't open it. I didn't block it either. I simply set the phone face down on the table and let the screen go dark again. He would call. He would cry. He would try. But I had nothing left to give. Forgiveness isn't something you can pull out of a drawer and hand to someone who's destroyed the furniture. It has to grow in fertile ground. And he had salted every inch of it. I wasn't angry anymore. That was the strangest part. I just wasn't anything. Not broken, not bitter, just done. I walked to the window and pulled the curtain back an inch. Outside, the neighbors' lights were still on. Their kitchen glowed golden. Laughter faintly spilled through the air, soft, distant, untouched by my storm. I imagined what it must be like to live inside that kind of peace. Maybe I would never know. Or maybe I'd find my own version of it, smaller, quieter, earned. My tea had gone cold. I didn't warm it up. I liked it that way. A little bitter, a little forgotten. Like me. I stared at the chair across from mine, the one I always thought I'd sit beside while rocking my grandchild someday. The chair was empty now, and maybe it always would be. But the ache was no longer unbearable. It was just there, like a scar, faded, but part of me. I didn't sleep that night, not out of stress, but because I finally had time to think. Real time. Quiet time. Not filled with errands or financial rescues or being the emergency contact for a man who couldn't even respect the woman who built him. The sun rose slowly, without ceremony. The kitchen window caught the first light, and for once, I didn't dread the day. I wasn't looking for revenge anymore. I'd already delivered it. Precisely. Cleanly. With no need for witnesses. He would live the rest of his life explaining why his child had no college fund, why his name wasn't on the deed to the house he swore was his, why no family portraits hung in the nursery. And every time he tried to rewrite the story, someone would remember the slap, the arrogance, the downfall, and the woman who walked away, silent but not defeated. The following week, I packed the last box. I didn't label it. I didn't need to. Everything inside had already lost meaning, and I wasn't moving to decorate. I was moving to disappear. I left the front door unlocked that morning, not out of carelessness, but because it no longer mattered. That house was no longer mine. It was never really his either. It was just a place that held echoes of lullabies, of slamming doors, of unanswered calls. My suitcase was small. I didn't take much. A few photo albums, a cashmere sweater he once bought me when he still knew how to love, and the original copy of my will, the new one, the one where his name didn't appear once, not even in the footnotes. The lawyer had it notarized 2 days prior. The fund I created for his child was no longer in his control. It would activate the moment she turned 18, bypassing him entirely. She'd never even know where it came from, just a letter, pre-written and signed, for the life you'll build, even if he didn't. I would not punish a child for the violence of her father, but I also would not let my name be a bridge he walked over. He built that family on lies and entitlement. Let him carry it on the weight of his own name. The neighbors asked where I was going. I smiled and said, just somewhere quieter. And that was the truth. I wasn't chasing adventure or starting a new chapter. I was closing the book entirely. I bought a small cottage upstate, 2 rooms, a narrow garden, and a porch that creaked just enough to feel like company. It overlooked a lake that froze in the winter and glistened in the summer. The realtor called it a writer's retreat. I wasn't a writer, but I knew what it meant to retreat. The first night in that house, I didn't cry. I didn't toast to freedom. I just sat on the porch, watching the wind move through the trees like it had someplace better to be. And maybe that's what I had become. Wind. Unseen. Untethered. Capable of moving entire things without ever being noticed again. He tried to call 5 times that first month. I never picked up. He tried email next. Then letters. Then a message through his wife. She called me mother in her voicemail. I deleted it. She never earned that word, and neither did he. In the final envelope he sent, the one I did open, there was no apology. Just excuses. He said he didn't mean it. That stress got the better of him. That he was just overwhelmed with the baby coming. And all I could think was, so was I. Overwhelmed with raising him. Overwhelmed with forgiving him. Overwhelmed with the silence I swallowed every time he chose someone else's comfort over my dignity. I didn't reply. I didn't even finish reading the letter. I simply folded it and slid it beneath the leg of a wobbly chair. It finally had a purpose. The day the baby was born, no one told me. I found out through a cousin's Facebook post, a blurry picture, a caption that read, "New beginnings." I stared at the photo for a long time, searching the child's face for something familiar, a nose, a cheekbone, something he might have inherited from me. But I saw nothing. Just soft skin and wide eyes, and a future I would no longer be a part of. And strangely, I felt no loss, only clarity. I had given him life once. I wouldn't do it again through sacrifice. Love doesn't mean staying. Sometimes it means leaving, quietly, permanently, without needing applause or understanding. I closed the app. I brewed a fresh pot of tea. I watered the garden. I lived. Months passed. Seasons shifted. No more calls came. No more letters. I think they finally understood. Or maybe they just gave up. Either way, it was peace. And peace doesn't need explanation. I joined a local book club. No one there knew who I was, and that anonymity felt like salvation. I told them I had no children. It wasn't a lie. Not anymore. Not by name, not by action. I belonged to no one. And that, for the first time in decades, felt like a gift. One evening, while sorting through old boxes, I found a birthday card he made me in 2nd grade. The handwriting was crooked, the colors were smudged, but the words were loud. I love you more than anything. You're the best mom ever. I read it once, then again. And then, without ceremony, I tore it in half. Not out of anger, just acknowledgement. That version of him no longer existed, and neither did the woman who believed it. We were both ghosts in each other's stories now, and ghosts don't write letters. They don't haunt. They just drift. I sometimes wonder if the child will grow up hearing stories about me. Maybe twisted ones, maybe honest ones, or maybe none at all. Maybe she'll grow up thinking her grandmother was a shadow, someone who disappeared before she arrived. But one day, when that scholarship letter arrives, when her hands hold the envelope that I sealed with everything he rejected, maybe then she'll pause. Maybe then she'll wonder. Maybe she'll trace the signature and feel something. Not sadness, but strength. And if she ever looks me up, I hope she finds nothing. Not out of shame, but because I never wanted her to carry the weight of my story. I just wanted her to have a chance. I don't tell this tale for revenge. I tell it for record. For every mother who gave until there was nothing left. For every slap that wasn't just a hand, but a sentence. You're no longer needed. And for every woman who quietly walked away, not because she was weak, but because she was finally strong enough to stop begging for a place she already built. I didn't leave to hurt him. I left because he already did. And now, the silence is mine.